This is the Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. All right, folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. I'm your host, Shane Lemaster. This is episode 49 with good friend of the show, Reilly Capps. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so the podcast audience out there got a little intro about who you are, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I kind of want to ask the first question that I ask all my guests, and that is, what does Conversations with the Mind mean to you? Like the title, the phrase, how does it resonate, and what comes up for you when you hear that?
Well, because I'm the drugs reporter for Rooster Magazine, I spend a lot of time thinking about drugs. And that's all different ones, from opioids to marijuana to psychedelics. And a lot of what the drugs are for is to talk to the mind or to silence the mind. And so from my perspective, this is often the question that I ask of people about their own drug use. What does it give them in terms of more access to their mind and body, or does it shut down their access to mind and body? So that's, one of the things that I'm really interested in.
Nice. I love that. Sorry, if anybody's watching this on YouTube and they keep seeing me like look down, I'm taking show notes and like jotting down stuff that I want to get to, because I mean, you have such a unique perspective, and I wanted to have you on for a whole lot of reasons. But I mean, right off the bat, I mean, this brings up a great aspect of consciousness that I think a lot of people are not addressing, but we've talked about previously on the podcast. And that is, a lot of throughout society right now, at least in the West, there seems to be, a newer trend of wanting to silence the mind, or not being comfortable with the uncomfortable states and the uncomfortable emotions that we feel. And so in order to silence that, there's almost a pattern of escapism, and that's one of those reasons why people use drugs. I know for sure in my past, when I was dealing with my own addictions, that was it. I was trying to escape reality. I was not jiving with what was going on around me, and I just wanted out, or I wanted to be numb. I didn't want to feel the pain, the emotional pain or the physical pain that I was feeling. And then on the other hand, I think there's this new trend that you and I are aware of, but is not quite, well, maybe it's a bit more mainstream these days. You probably have a better finger on the pulse as far as the news stream goes, but there's a new revolution coming around in the US that is not new to the human race, but new to us in our life, where people are wanting to access their minds to a greater capacity. And that's where my interests are, purely for psychedelic use, or for studying the mind or psychology in general. I come from a sports psychology background, so I'm all about optimization of the mind, Buddhist practice, meditation, things like that to optimize the mind, mindfulness. But psychedelics and things like cannabis and other things like that can greatly enhance our abilities as human beings too. I love how you're bringing in both those aspects as, sort of what's been on your mind recently.
Well, I too have struggled with addiction really badly throughout my life. I set up the camera so that you could see, pointed on my wall right there. You can't tell, but it's my 5-year chip from
Nice.
AA. And I used to drink morning, noon, and night, and used to crack my first beer at 10 in the morning, cracked my last beer at 2 a.m., lost girlfriends, jobs, opportunities. And I also ate whatever pill I could get my hand on, opioids and muscle relaxers. I just used to love to numb out. I mean, it feels really good to numb out. And so I did that for years, and it was, wonderful in the moment. It just doesn't end up very well, at least not for me. Because like you said, I come from 100 generations of Irish Catholic alcoholics, and that's just what we do. It's just the culture. So I didn't think anything was possible other than that, or desirable. Why? What would you want to do with your evenings other than quiet, chill out, stare into the screen, or whatever? Um, and I think you said on your intro that I used to be an EMT, and I used to see this in the back of the ambulance all the time. Was, people have shitty lives, and like they don't live in whatever makes their life shitty. Maybe they're injured, maybe their mom died, maybe they just can't find the good place and purpose in the world. They don't gobble psychedelics, they gobble opioids and alcohol, and we on the ambulance pick them up off the ground. Um, and often they ask us for opioids and they want fentanyl from us because we have that. And so um, yeah, that's just, life is tough. And and I don't think that, I know you're big into not stigmatizing addiction, and I think that's really important. Why wouldn't you? It's an understandable desire. I had it. I probably still have it. Just to numb out. I mean, there's certain days. I have a kid now, and my life is tough sometimes. And there's certain days when it's like, I would just love to have a beer and just go down like this. So it's a constant fight.
Well, first of all, congratulations on 5 years. That's
Thanks, man.
amazing. I just reached 10 years in June, no alcohol.
Nice.
That
Great. Good
was,
for you.
yeah, thanks. At my first peyote ceremony I ever went to with the Lakota roadman, he told me that uh, he told me this story about how the peyote had these spirits, and that every molecule, every substance, including water, where coffee has its own spirit attached to it, its own energetic vibration, its own presence. And he said, some of these spirits kind of jive with our spirits, but alcohol, that spirit that's attached to that, is almost always a negative spirit, and it just does not jive with the human organism in the way that we use it these days. And that really made a lot of sense. I'm like, oh, so that's why, they call it wine and spirits. It's kind of like a warning before you even get in the store, for me anyway. Yeah, but alcohol was that was the catalyst for um, a lot of fond memories, a lot of memories that I'm not so fond of, but that were great learning experiences, retrospectively now. And I like that you delineated the difference between, there's a lot of drugs out there, a lot of drugs that people don't talk about, caffeine included. I'm sure you saw people with like heat exhaustion and dehydration, on your EMT shifts as well. But I think it's important that people understand that, these drugs are not only classified incorrectly in the scheduling system, have much greater potential for medicinal and useful things like optimizing ourselves, like you mentioned before, as opposed to some of these other substances that have more damaging effects and less likelihood to affect positive change. And I'm including alcohol in that as well. Alcohol, opiates. I've worked in addictions for, I don't know, close to 5 years now as a licensed addiction counselor. And, I see addicts every single day. I work with addicts on a daily basis. And a lot of it, like you said, is this desire to want to numb. And there's a lot of pain out there. There's a lot of pain out there at the current moment. But I also see a lot of hope out there as well.
I think for me, there's nothing wrong. Every drug has its purpose. We wouldn't use it as a society if it didn't. Alcohol is great at a wedding, because you have to talk to your in-laws that you've never met before, and that's hard. And so
Good
alcohol
point.
can smooth that, and it's like, hey, everybody, life is great, woo! And you get out of your quiet little, like, isn't this a nice little gathering? How was your vacation last week to the Poconos? You can be that exuberant self that's difficult to to have. And try taking psychedelics at a wedding. It's not easy. You end up in the bathroom staring in the mirror, wondering like, oh God, can I go out there and handle this? So, and fentanyl too even has a great use. Somebody comes in the ambulance and they got a bone sticking out of their forearm, which, happened, which I saw. I mean, fentanyl is great because that's not a great situation to see your own bone in the air. That's not how the body was designed.
So what about like ketamine? Did you guys use ketamine on the back of the ambulance?
Ketamine came online after I quit, but now they're using it.
Okay, yeah, because I know that they use it in battlefield situations and are finding it a lot more useful than standard, anesthetics like morphine or opiate-based ones, because the person is a little bit more lucid, even though they're in a disassociative state. They're more able to affect or get themselves out of harm's way, as opposed to just being like totally incapacitated on other drugs.
And the best thing for us as medics and EMTs is that doesn't depress your respiratory system.
Mm-hmm.
So if we shoot someone up with fentanyl, we numb their pain, which is the great point, but then they slow down their breathing, and we have one more thing to worry about. Like, we have to watch their chest rise and fall to make sure that they don't stop breathing. And on ketamine, my understanding is that it doesn't do that. So they breathe normally, which helps move the blood, which helps move keeps the oxygen up, does all these other things that you want to do with someone who's been in a traumatic state. So I think it's going to be helpful. I'd be interested to talk to the EMTs and medics in Boulder who are using it now.
So this is an interesting or an interest of mine. I used to do harm reduction for psychedelics at festivals. I used to work security. I used to teach or train security organizations like how to handle someone who's having a quote unquote bad trip or a challenging experience on any number of drugs that people find at festivals, and how to train them to deal with it properly. I'm wondering, in your EMT training, did you get any sort of, I mean, most of you guys don't get any sort of training in that. Most police don't either, is what my experience is. But you being kind of tied in with these communities, you've got to have a much greater sense of, from an EMT's perspective, like what to do and what not to do in a situation if you're supporting someone else in that state.
No, it was really a difficult thing for me often to see the way that emergency medicine tends to treat folks who are having difficult trips, whether that's meth, cannabis, whatever. There was a lot of fear in the back of the ambulance. Someone comes in on a meth binge and they're talking a million miles an hour, and they're waving their hands around and they're telling us stories about the CIA following them and how their brother, wants to kill their dog, and how they're the Archangel Gabriel with a message for humanity. That's scary. And as a medic or an EMT, you feel that really acutely. And so the default mode is to protect yourself, protect the person, and shoot them up with downer drugs to get them to go out. And that was tough for me, knowing that, first of all, most drug users are not violent. And just to see the way that those experiences are written off or devalued, or that we just want to get away from them. Often if you talk to these folks, they would tell you an interesting story if you let it go long enough. Someone says they're the Archangel Gabriel with a message for humanity. You would sit there and say, tell me about that. How do you know that? Where did this message come from? What does it mean? How does that affect your life? And you would get from a place where they're just waving their hands and screaming, and why doesn't anyone believe me that I'm Gabriel, to a place where they're calmer, someone is listening to them, um, and you can bring it back to real life with them and say, okay, so you're Gabriel, but notice how that's affecting your relationship with your brother. Or have you been working lately? No. Okay, so don't you need to work to get food? Okay, so could you be the archangel and also go to work and also, take some of your meds? And sometimes that's not possible. People are just too out there. Um, but I tried to take the time to do that. And to answer your direct question, no, we get almost no training on it. It's just every time someone is fucked up or weird, here's the drugs that you can do to get them unfucked up. That's it.
Yeah, and I think the main thing that I think I used to teach, the underlying philosophy, is that these people are inside of a process. And it doesn't matter what substance they're on. It doesn't matter if they're having a psychotic break and they're sober. They're in the middle of a process. And by halting that process with those specific drugs that I think most emergency personnel are, I think that's still the primary training is using downers. I think firefighters and police are trained the same way. But it seems counterintuitive, but you want to let that process fully realize itself, to play itself out. Like you said, to ask questions, to get inquisitive, to engage the person on their level, not telling them they're crazy or anything like that, but engaging them on their level and helping to ground them while not, upsetting the process. That's the whole problem, is like when somebody's in the middle of some kind of mental process and it gets halted, that goes unresolved. And then that becomes like a trauma in the consciousness. The person might not even remember. Maybe they were in a blackout and the trauma was left unresolved. Now they, 5 years later, they have some kind of mental health issue and they have no idea why. It's because maybe this trauma was not allowed to play itself all the way through. I mean, our human bodies physiologically have this amazing ability to want to heal themselves and go towards homeostasis. And I believe our consciousness wants to do that as well. Our mind wants to find balance just like our body does. And if there's some kind of dysregulation or some kind of response to our internal stimulus during our experiences on any substance, or doing high risk activities, extreme sports, when I do jujitsu, things like that, like I reach altered states of consciousness and flow states, and I want to explore all those things.
Yeah, or your mom dying or having a baby or any of these things that can really jar you and spin people. Imagine if like you had a baby and you were all fucked up and talking fast and being weird, and they came in and shot you up with Haldol. It'd be like, no, I just had a baby. That's why I'm crazy. Life makes you crazy. And that's the other thing about when people talk about drugs causing psychosis, which is a big talk right now about having to do with cannabis. I think there is something there. But I also think that life causes these difficult states. And so often in the back of the ambulance, it wasn't just meth. It wasn't just cannabis. It wasn't just whatever drug. It was that plus a really tough time in their life. They didn't take meth because they were, making six figures at the stock trading place downtown, and for their hot wife to drive in the Lamborghini. They took it because their life is hard and they need a little extra boost to get it going. What kind of things did you see in the festival scene where you saw this kind of thing?
Mostly just people who, were either new to the festival scene or were being irresponsible of their drug use. It was mostly people who were mixing different substances, taking or using substances that were unverified, like untested, Oftentimes we saw bad drug interactions and more psychotic states when, people were taking like ecstasy pills that were also laced with other things like PCP, and the person had ingested something that they didn't intend to ingest. So it was more of a, kind of like a paranoia state, like I have no idea what I just put in my body, and therefore, I can't relax into the space, I kind of want to ask you about, because I mean, and again, in the intro, I went over your journalistic pursuits. But that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to have you on the show, is because, and that's how you and I met. So our listeners know, like, we met on an article that you did on me a couple years ago, and we've known each other since then. And I've continued to follow you and follow some of your work, and just I'm fascinated by the lens that you go through life with, right? So I go through life with my own lens, through a lens of jujitsu, number one. So like I'll walk into the store and right away I'm like looking at people. My situational awareness is up. I'm just making sure, like, okay, I know where my exits are. I'm like in this mindset, and I view reality sometimes that way. Or from a Buddhist perspective, and I'll go into a different setting and I'll just view life through that lens, and I'm fascinated by your lens as a journalist, as someone who observes culture, observes people, observes trends, observes all these things that happen out in society. And sometimes I'm sure you get to participate in them too. Oh, there's my co-host in the background. That's my dog. But from your lens, like a journalistic lens, tell me a little bit about that, and how that you think affects or colors the way you experience life.
I gotta ask before I answer, isn't there contradiction between I'm going into the grocery store and seeing where's the exits and whose ass I can kick, and I'm a Buddhist and we're all one and there's no such thing as death?
Yeah, and that there is a contradiction, but I'm not going into stores thinking like whose ass I can kick. More, I'm thinking of like self-defense. Like, if something were to happen in the store, where would I want to be? What would I want to do? Things like that. Not like an aggressive thing. And there is that's been a mental battle that I've had for many years. And I like to, because I've found very little solution for it myself when I contemplate it, I tend to adopt more of the mindsets from like old samurai mindsets of old Japan, where there was this complete warrior culture, and the samurai embodied their warrior selves, their mind, body, and spirit. They were killers. They were killers for hire oftentimes. And yet they were very spiritual, extremely Buddhist, practiced other arts like calligraphy, and wanted to be well balanced in mind, body, and spirit. And that's the best thing that I've been able to find, to be able to rectify those two imbalances in my own mind, like being this professional martial artist, but also being a Buddhist, and not wanting to do harm to anybody else. Maybe I think that's probably why I was not as successful as I always wanted to be in MMA, is because, I never wanted to hurt anybody. I had a tough time like pulling that or flipping that switch for no reason to go in there and smash somebody, which some people can do that. But for me, in my Buddhist beliefs, it hurt me physically. Like, it hurt my heart when I was in a position to hurt somebody, and I took that chance rather than just calm them down, or rather than just made it so that they couldn't hurt me, which is what jujitsu is really all about, which is, getting control of somebody else's body so they can't hurt you.
When you were a drunk or younger or more aggressive, did you get into like bar fights and like have that male urge that I had when I was in college to just have fights for no reason?
Yes, I did that, but I didn't ever want to hurt anybody else. My reasons for, and it was usually me who would pick fights, but my reasons for picking fights was not so that I could hurt them, but so that I could experience it was my cop out to get like self-inflicted damage, right? So I'm
Mm,
gonna make you pissed off at me so that you beat the shit out of me because I feel
right.
like I deserve that, and I'm just gonna sit here and take it.
Yeah.
And that's how it usually would be. I have memories of like like standing over the keg and not letting anybody else get any beer until they punched me in the face first. And like people lining up just to do that. I'm like, no, you're not getting a beer until you do that. Like I did terrible things like that because of that escapism, because I did not, I didn't like who I was, or I didn't like um, my experience in life. It was tough. It was challenging.
I got into a fight once playing beer pong, and you know how you're allowed to like trash talk?
Yeah.
And I stood at the end and I mooned the other player and his girlfriend, who I didn't really know. And I'm just standing there with my butt hanging out, and he's like, "Hey man, you're at a party. You can't be doing that." I was drunk off my face. And I was like, "What are you gonna do? This is the rules of beer pong." And so it escalated, and I was like, "Let's take it outside." And he was like, "I'm not gonna fight you over beer pong. This is ridiculous." And I was like, the crowd had gathered around us, and I was like, "This dude's not gonna fight me. Why won't he fight me?" And I'm telling the crowd, like, "This guy's scared to hit me." And right then, bam, this punch comes in the side of my head, and I went down as hard as I've ever gone down. And it was like, whew, okay, I guess he will hit me. Wow. All right. That was just one of many times when I started a dumb fight over nothing. One time, a guy had a Texas hat, and I went to see you, and so I tried to fight him over that. And I tried to do that when I was at a hula party, wearing a coconut bra and a grass skirt, and I tried to get in a fight. This is the things that young men do.
Hmm.
In terms of my lens, I don't know that I have a huge like big theory about it. I try to I just see things that are interesting to me, um, and then I follow them, even if it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense either at the time or in retrospect or the people around me. Um, yeah, just like what is that thing? And there's an interesting thing there, and people haven't um, discussed it enough, or I haven't heard it enough. So yeah, I also did a lot of travel and just like, what is Vietnam? What does that place look like? What is Indonesia? What is Iraq? What does that place look like? Um, I guess my philosophy of life is Stoicism. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Stoicism. Tell me more.
Oh man, Stoicism. It's how to summarize Stoicism. Man, I'm blanking, but it's like so it comes from these ancient Greeks. Starts with Diogenes the Cynic, who says that life, you can't change life. You're not the master of life. Life is going to move along at its own pace. And your job as a person who wants to get into the rhythm of life is to move at the pace of life. And so he likened life to our life to there's a wagon going down the road, and there's a dog attached to it by a rope, and we are the dog, and the wagon is life. And you can run a little bit ahead of the wagon of life, and you can drag a little bit behind. But if you drag too far behind, you get choked. Too far ahead, you get choked. So trying to keep up with that rhythm by following nature, studying what's been done before you, and then it has a lot of like things that you'll resonate with about all is one. Um, we're made out of the universal substance, that there's no real separation between us, that we share a mind, things like that that you would dig.
Beautiful. I'm going to look more into Stoicism because most people describe me as like if I gave them one word, they describe me as being stoic. But that's not necessarily the same as following a path of stoicism. It's much more than that.
Yeah, and it gets a bad rap because it seems like you're unemotional and dead, but
Yeah.
that's not what it says. It's about part of that thing with like, I'm going to be stoic. is not, it's about not adding suffering. So there's what is it, a Buddhist concept called the second arrow, maybe, where it's like you get hit by an arrow and that's a pain, but then you add all the suffering on top of it by saying, oh, I'm going to die. Oh, this guy hates me. Oh, I'm a loser. That's the second arrow that you give to yourself. You can't afford those. You can't avoid those first arrows, but just let it go and try to watch your thoughts to try to deal with the pain of life.
That's beautiful. I like how you described it as going along with the flow of life. And for modern terms, maybe in like surfer hippie stoner terms, I think of it as like, surfing the wave. Like the wave is life, and you can't when you jump in the ocean, you can't control the way a wave is going to move or fall or break, or you can't control any of that. But the best you can do is surf the wave, keep up with the wave, stay on the crest of the wave, maybe master your place, interacting with the wave rather than fighting against it. Because when you try and fight against the wave in the ocean, you're just going to get smashed, right? But if you let go and you just and you gain some skill, then you can master it, and it can look beautiful from an outsider's perspective, just watching you surf the wave of life in the way you do. Yeah, I'm definitely going to look up a little bit more about that. But I ask you about this journalistic lens because one of my favorite people of all time is Hunter S. Thompson. And I don't know if you know much about him, but he was a doctor of journalism. He invented gonzo journalism. He also wrote for the Washington Post, I believe. And he's fascinating as a writer, but he's also fascinating as a human being, as as one of these fractal versions of consciousness that we all are. He was certainly an interesting one, huge proponent of drug use, often incorporated it into his writing. And just like you, he chose his stories based on what he was interested on, based on his passion. Like he might get assigned to some sporting event that he was not interested in, but he would find something interesting about the crowd and how they were reacting and how they were just like capitalist slime or whatever. And he would find interest in that. And then the whole story would be about that and nothing about the race that he was going to see. And so I love how he, his lens as a journalist helped him to express and share with the world a lot of the damage that was being done by politics, a lot of the things that were wrong with society. And he pointed them out in such an artistic, such a creative way. And so I'm fascinated by that.
Oh man, I love Hunter. I was a big reader of him, especially early, but even like in the last couple of years, I've gone back and read some collections of his writing in Rolling Stone, his coverage of the elections in '68 and '72, and a bunch of his sports writing that I'd never read before. And he was uneven. He would write fantastic things, and then he would ramble on forever. But when he was good, he was so good, and he was so cutting and so sharp. The Kentucky Derby is Decadent and Depraved is one of my favorites of all time. And the way he talks about submerging himself into the humanity of the middle is beautiful. And just the savagery with which he takes those people down just destroys those, like, he talks May Blossom senility. He talks about these just sad old Kentuckians that are like punching the clock on life, nowhere to go in 30 after 30 in this life. He says, hang on and humor the children. It's like, whoa, that's deep. It's like, oh, how many people do you know that do that? It's a lot of people. So yeah, I've tried to be like Hunter a lot of time, and it's worked sometimes and not worked others. It's like, I'm trying to write about the town council meeting, and I try to slip into some Hunter shit, like the savagery of the of the Planning and Zoning Commission of Boulder, Colorado. They're lizard people that prey on the souls of the living. And my editor would be like, no, they're just trying to do a zoning change. Can you just please write that?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, you're right. All right, I'll tone it down. So you have to play that. One of the things that I love about Rooster is that they kind of like that stuff. I mean, there's a certain level that they won't let me go above, but they like the raucous writing, the rebellious, taking a new angle, using profanity, talking about sex, talking about drugs. And so I'm really grateful that I get to write for a place that has that kind of open mindedness and a desire to try new things and a desire to speak in the language of everyday folks, everyday Sibs that are like our rough age and younger than us. It's hard to find a conversation that's like doesn't have the word fuck in it in everyday. So why are we writing as if that's not a like regular thing? So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think just like a lot of people quote or cite like Steve Jobs or um, Doc Ellis as some famous people who have sort of enhanced their legendary status solely, or not solely, but in large part because of psychedelic substances. I think Hunter S. Thompson is another one of those cultural icons that we can point to, that he used a variety of different molecules in a variety of different ways as tools to help him channel whatever he was trying to get through. And I think at some point in his life, mostly booze, I think, got in the way of his creative process. So some of his substance use got away from him, but a lot of his psychedelic use that I've read about has been largely informative and has been there's like this feeling in his writing like he's grown because of the experience. No matter how frightening it was, he comes out of those experiences having grown a little bit.
Yeah. Um, I mean, he arguably did too many. He
Yeah.
might have fried himself a little bit. And I know we're not supposed to use that term now. They fried his brain, but oof, you saw him in later life, and he looked a little frazzled. Whereas you look at like someone like Tom Wolfe, who wrote about it soberly, and he was able to work at a high level for longer. Um, so, but I think you need people like Hunter to like go out onto the edge and tell people what it looks like.
I love that
And
quote, man. That quote that he has. It's something like the edge, like you can't speak about it unless you've been there, unless you're willing to go to that edge and push yourself beyond it. You don't know, you're never going to know what the edge is, and you can't talk about it. And he was one of those people to really push it to the edge.
yeah, and his then we don't have enough writers who are doing it. I think now we're starting to see it again. And this is where psychedelics are interesting, is because they take you to a place that is just so interesting. Um, so yeah, I'm glad to hear you're a fan of Hunter.
Yeah.
I need to get back and read more of his stuff. It's We live in an era now that the internet like just doesn't reward writing like Hunter's, because it takes a long time and you have to read it carefully and spend a lot of time with it. And so much of internet writing is just scrolling and looking at headlines. So it's tough to write like that. Everyone has to crank out so much work now.
Yeah. So, I mean, as a journalist, you naturally, I mean, following your own interests, you sort of fall into, or you get to observe different groups. Like I've seen you at psychedelic oriented events. I just heard that you gave a presentation at Denver Psychedelic Club. That's awesome. I'd like to hear more about that. But you hang out with this crowd, and then I saw you at the Phil Lewis Art Gallery. So you're in this art crowd. So as a journalist, you got to be sort of like a shapeshifter among different groups, but also groups that collaborate too. And I'm sure that helps inform your concept of consciousness.
I mean, someone said to me, "What's life like out on the weird beat?" And it's a little bit like that because I've written about flat earthers and people who are super into aliens and people who are like injecting strange things into their bodies because they think it's going to give them long life. Um, so I think my approach to all those things is just to try to do what I did on the ambulance, which is just to meet people on their level. And like, you think the earth is flat? Okay, tell me about that. What does that do for you? And how does that affect your life? And not necessarily is the earth round or not, but isn't that hard to like go to dinner parties as a flat earther? What does your mom think about you? Um, you
What are you
know,
escaping through thinking this, right?
and what do you get out of it? Because they now have a cool community and they're like super friends. And then they sit in these rooms and they spin these conspiracy theories about the Mandela effect and 9/11 and just all of these things that they get. That's their hobby. Like, so and and yeah, just that non-judgmental um, interest in what's the level that people are on,
Mm.
because that's why I've gravitated toward the drug beat, because I feel like so many people who write about drugs want to tell you whether drugs are good or not and whether drug users are good or not. And because the tone from like Time magazine and places like that is drug users are bad, um, except now they're willing to admit begrudgingly very small places here and there that maybe if you use a little bit of this drug here and a little bit of that drug there, you can be a good person. And
Which is what we're doing anyway with psychiatric drugs, right? With our ads, we're pumping that out and saying, here, take a little bit of this and a little cocktail of that, and we'll get rid of your depression and numb you out so you can continue to be part of the workforce and make us money as a, capitalist
yeah,
system.
and it's like this social engineering that I think newspapers have to get into sometimes, where it's like, here's how we fix the problems, and here's what the problems are. And if we just took more Prozac, then there would be more whatever. If we just got everybody to take fish oil, then and the people that take semolina or whatever are going to have better gut health, and then they'll be able to care for their children better. And I don't know. I mean, that's all fine and good, but then what I try to do is just to take it a step further, or a step back maybe, and just say, Why are you doing that? What's going on with you? Um, you've seen the DMT entities. What does that do for your life? How does that affect you? Um, but yeah, I mean, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today was microdosing. Um, and this is like the ultimate thing where they where a lot of mainstream publications and a lot of the chatter on the internet and stuff is like, this is the acceptable way to use psychedelics
Mm.
because we can harness it, it's controllable, nobody gets weird, but you can still be a great whatever your role in society is. um, and and I'm all for that. Everybody needs to get through the day, and if a microdose can help you to be a better whatever, a painter or a garbage collector or whatever, then I'm all for it. But I keep hearing this criticisms from old time acid heads, like that this is the dumbing down and the watering down of psychedelics, and what do you think about it? Have you heard that criticism a lot?
I haven't heard that specific criticism, but it's an interesting one. Can you unpack what you've heard a little bit more?
Yeah, that if you only take microdoses, then you don't get the message of psychedelics.
Okay, so um, yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. So I'm actually giving a presentation. If anybody's interested, any of the listeners out there, I'm giving a presentation put on by the NOAC Society at the end of this month. at the end of July. It's a psychedelic professionals meetup. Where a number of professionals from any field, medical field, psychology field, massage therapy, whatever, can come to these meetings. The public can come, and I'm giving a presentation on microdosing. So look that up on Facebook, the NOAC Society, if you want more information. So my opinion on microdosing, like we were talking about with all these substances, I think they're all tools, and they can be used in different ways for different purposes. And I think that's where a lot of the negative propaganda about drugs in the media comes from, are people not knowing that fact, that you can use your substances with intention, and you can achieve incredible things that you never would have been able to possibly achieve without them. I cite Steve Jobs again, inventing the iPod. He said he did that on an LSD trip. Doc Ellis pitched a no-hitter on LSD, and he was on a high dose of LSD, mind you. I'm super stoked for Ice. I think it's Ice-T's son, or Ice-T is putting out or maybe I can't tell. Ice Cube is putting out a movie about Doc Ellis soon, so that's going to be really cool. But yeah, microdosing is technically a watered down version of the standardized 200 microgram dose of LSD, but it's useful in other ways for different reasons, like Silicon Valley, right? Solving high level problems in mathematics. We've shown that anecdotally, and there's some new research out there showing that there's evidence that creative thinking is positively affected with microdosing, and that it's not just a placebo effect. I've talked about how I've used microdosing in athletics. That was the article that you wrote on me, is using microdosing in jiu-jitsu, and reaching flow states. Joe Rogan talks about it on his podcast all the time, and more recently he talks about how there's more and more MMA athletes and fighters who are using microdoses of psilocybin and LSD in their training to enhance learning, to enhance muscle memory, to enhance cognitive functioning and problem solving and things like that. Actually, I'm competing in a qualifier for jiu-jitsu for a pro card here in August. It's called the High Rollers Tournament, and it's the jiu-jitsu's world attempt to integrate cannabis culture and jiu-jitsu. So it's a professional jiu-jitsu show, and the opponents go out on the mat and they smoke a joint together before the match, and then the match starts, and then it's just like a jiu-jitsu match, and the whole crowd is smoking too. And so it's built around this brotherhood of jiu-jitsu, but also brotherhood of cannabis culture. The winners win like a pound of weed and some medals and stuff. But yeah, I'm competing in that in August, so I'm super stoked for that. But yeah, microdosing is fantastic.
Can I cut in?
Yes, absolutely.
For that's a Rooster article, 100%. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want to be there, and that's totally something I will write about. When is it?
It's in August. I'll have to get you the date for sure after this, but I have it written down.
Okay. That is fucking fascinating, man. I love that so much. Before we get into I also want to say I love NOAC super much. Absolutely adore those people. And I go to a lot of those psychedelic professionals meetups, and they're so well done, so high level, so, just they got their shit together. And that is so good to see. So I'm glad to hear you're talking to them. They always have super interesting discussions. Before we get into the criticism of microdosing, I want to say it's super interesting, and I've heard so many stories of people who just love it and have crushed it. I did a story recently about Ross Rigabaldi, or whatever his name is. He won he was the snowboarder that won the first snowboard gold medal at the 1998 Olympics, and then they busted him for cannabis. I don't know if you remember this story, but he tested positive for cannabis. They took away his gold medal, and it was a huge uproar. Um, and it verified everyone's suspicions about the snowboarders at the time, that they're losers and stoners and no good. And so he's been fighting this stigma for 20 years, and now he's on the like other side of it. Now that cannabis is cool, it's a great story.
Give me my medal back is what he should be saying. Give me my medal back.
So they did actually give him the medal back, and so
Yes.
he does have that. But it was such a scarring episode that he keeps it up in a cupboard in his house because it's painful to think about getting your medal stripped away for smoking a joint. He says he wasn't even smoking; he was around it. Who knows? But um, but it's come full circle, and now he is got a cannabis company, and he's hopefully going to make it as an entrepreneur. But anyways, what he told me was that he now uses LSD to train. He's not professional, but he loves to use it to, I think it was mountain biking, go on these really long mountain bike rides. And then I wrote a story about a dude who uses LSD to crush at these ultra endurance, long distance bike packing races. Have you heard of bike packing before? I hadn't either,
No.
but you put all your gear on a mountain bike and you ride from Canada to Mexico or whatever, and that's the race.
What? That's so far.
And so it's got two components, which is you got to be super athletic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, many components. You got to have your gear down so you can put up your tent, and you also got to like not sleep. So that's another part of the game is you'll win if you only sleep 3 hours, but you might die or go crazy. So anyways, he told me that on the low level of LSD, it's just easier to get in the moment and survive and get into that flow state and rock it for however the fuck long you have to do it when you're on these races. So I think those are super interesting stories to me. And I don't think that we can like, I just love hearing those because I just think they're so interesting and so counterintuitive.
Yeah, and not just for athletes out there either, but for anybody, and this is where I think the criticism from the old timers falls a little short. And they're right that, you can get so much more therapeutic benefit from and personal growth as far as like internal, deep, healing, transformative shit from larger doses of psychedelics, for sure. Like that's been studied. Johns Hopkins has looked into mystical states, and all these things happen at higher doses, right? The deep therapeutic effects. But where it falls short is that microdosing is still a useful tool, and I think it's more accessible to the general public, mass spectrum, right? So there may be, if there's 350 million people in the US, say 30 million are interested in psychedelics but have never done it, but there may be like 20 million of them who are scared to do it because of all the stories that they hear of high dose experiences, even if they're not stories of challenging experiences, but stories of like seeing dragons and like just having altered perception. That's scary shit, right? It takes courage to even want to go on an inner journey like that. But microdosing may seem a little more accessible to those people who may be more willing to enjoy some of the benefits of the psychedelic molecule. The inquisitiveness, the flow states, the heightened productivity, the heightened energy with minimal, if any, negative side effects comparatively to psychotropic medications. Then, I think anybody in the general public could be using these things with minimal risk, minimal harm, if that makes sense. And the old timers are right. You get more from a larger dose, but you got to be in a controlled setting with other people who know what they're doing, making sure that safety is the number one concern. I mean, that's where people go wrong.
Yeah, I'm not. So this is not my perspective exactly, but this is just things that I'm hearing from the
Mhm.
old school acid heads. And they're just saying like, you're selling them short. This is not what they're for. It's not what they do. You're turning them into Prozac. You're turning them into Adderall. Like they're not as that's they. I was promised enlightenment, and what you're giving me is a headache medicine. Um, so the old school are like, we don't need to tell people to take less. We need to tell people to take more. And like think about the old school like psychedelic heads. They're always pushing you to take a higher dose. And just yeah. So I mean I've just been talking to them, and I'm right now trying to put this in an article that sort of conveys these concerns from these mostly oldsters, but um, just to put that debate out there, and just to hear people, just to give voice to the folks who say, I like psychedelics because they show you that reality is not what you thought it was. That reality, the world is larger and deeper and weirder and more alive than you thought it was. Um, and if you're doing it in this small ball way, then it's sort of like, I don't know, looking at a painting by Leonardo da Vinci and just looking at one corner of it and being like, isn't that a nice shade of red? But you're missing the whole beautiful thing.
Mm. Yeah, and I think both uses are completely valid. I think it goes back to what is the user trying to achieve? Are you trying, if your goals are to achieve greater focus, greater productivity, greater energy, then maybe a high dose is not for that. If your goal is to achieve spiritual enlightenment, or to face your own mortality and be okay with life and death and things like that, or to explore, whatever I call it, the inner verse, to just go exploring, then maybe a higher dose is for you. And there's users who do both, depending on what their goal is in that particular session. I have a friend who, he runs marathons, and he runs marathons on microdoses. But on the weekends, after a long week of training, he'll take high doses of any number of substances, depending on what sort of spiritual entity he wants to tap into, or what sort of um, information he wants to download that day about reality. So that brings me to my next question too, about you and your opinion, because this show is really all about consciousness, and all about how we are each individually like fractalized minds of this larger collective mind. I think right in line with your Stoic philosophy as well. Like, how do you conceptualize reality? Obviously, as a journalist, you're working right here in this 3D reality, but as a psychedelic explorer, you also know that this is not all that there is. That this is just a small sliver. So how do you make sense of this?
I don't.
Good answer. That's a perfect answer.
Um, there was a time when I tried to make sense of it, um, but I have, in talking to people that know their way around consciousness and whatever psychedelics, the more you try to make sense of it, the less sense it makes. And the deeper you go into it, the more layers of weirdness there are.
Mhm.
Um, so existing in the mystery, I guess.
Mm,
I think that sometimes, like, you're trying to figure out what it is like a form of grasping.
yes.
Um, and I am going to nail it down as it's your mind, or it's the world mind, or it's the spirits, or it's the computer simulation, or it's the aliens, or it's the just in your head, or it's this. You're searching for an answer that, first of all, you can't do. Your brain's just not big enough or whatever. And second of all, you come to a greater feeling of the world when you open up and say, I don't know. Because I write about this a lot. So I write about the people that talk about, are the DMT entities, what are the DMT entities? Do I need to explain what those are to our leadership?
To the
Listenership?
audience, I'll just do it real briefly. So commonly reported among DMT users, they see these little creatures, little gremlins, little creatures kind of moving and manipulating reality and molecules around the room. And some people say that they've communicated with them as well. But commonly reported among experiences.
Very common, very, very common. And you can't avoid seeing them if you go into the DMT space. And so I write about these people that have these elaborate theories of what those things are, where they come from, how we see them. The most recent one is this guy, Andrew Gallimore from Japan. And he wrote this long book about the way that the brain is a signal, it catches signals from different places. You've talked about this on your show.
Yeah, it's like I've talked about it as if it's like a tuning fork that it can pick up different frequencies or vibrations, and it kind of filters or turns it into information, turns it into content for download.
And that could be true. But these books just end up being very incondite and recondite, difficult to read and understand for a sib like me, because it builds these, he has these ideas about, here's the way the lattice work of your brain could be a signal catcher for these other frequencies based on the chemical structure of DMT and its similarities to serotonin and the way it fits into the gaps between your neurons. And so I try to understand these things. I talk to Andrew, I read these books, because it's interesting as hell, and you can't do psychedelics without asking these questions. But I just can't make sense of it. I just can't, it doesn't hit me. You know what I mean? So that's where I am, I guess, right now.
Well, again, I have to go back through my Buddhist lens to get my own answer to this. And, like you said, they would say that even grasping for good things is still a form of grasping. So even if you're not grasping at drugs and alcohol and sex and gambling in negative ways, if you're grasping towards love, if you're grasping at enlightenment, if you're grasping at connection, then that's still a form of grasping, and therefore will eventually lead to more suffering. They say we are the cause of our own suffering, and it's because of that attachment, because of that grasping. And so I think at this point in the podcast, I think when I first started, my goal was, let's map consciousness. Let's figure it out by bringing together all these people. Let's figure out what this thing is. And then as shows went on and I had more discussions, I now realize that I'm just going to be disappointed if that's the goal the whole time, because we're never going to find the answer. It's beyond us. But what I found is that it's not about grasping at the end result or the answer, but it is about still pursuing, still seeking, still journeying, still exploring, with no intention of finding an answer, but just exploring for the sake of exploring because it's curious, because these existential questions are the most interesting questions any of us can even ask. Who are we? What are we? is consciousness in our brain, or is it out here and then our brain just kind of tunes it? Is consciousness this large cloud above us all that we're all like individual little nodes of? Or are we just, am I the only reality and you're just a projection of me, right? And maybe you're not real. Like, who knows? And that's why I find it so fascinating now in this point in the podcast is now it's just about exploring. It's just about the journey and not grasping. And I think I'm going to be much happier with that approach than seeking that result.
I think that's a great perspective. For me lately, it's just been about feeling. My teachers these days say, like, don't try to figure it out, just feel how it feels. So if you open yourself up in meditation to the whatever the thing is, what does it feel like? And generally, when you open yourself up to the thing, you feel more relaxed and you feel more calm and more centered. And so that may be the most information that I'd be able to receive about it, or the most that I'd be able to say about it, which is, yeah, I've taken some meditation classes recently from the Tibetan Buddhist school of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and they are have these really, out there beliefs from a Western perspective about the ways in which you can connect to the infinite, whatever. So is there an infinite? I don't know. But when you open yourself and you feel that and you follow their instructions, and they say feel the infinite or whatever, you can feel calm and you can feel something. So that's information. And that's what I got right now at this moment.
That's beautiful. Well, I have lots and lots of memories of not only experiences with psychedelics, but experiences in flow states and experiences doing extreme sports and doing things that I never thought I would ever do and accomplishing things I'd never, that feeling of this is where I'm supposed to be in this moment right now, connected. And this is meant to be happening. So many instances that I can recall of that feeling, of that connectedness. And I know what it feels like for me, but I want to know, when you hear that from the school, feel what reality feels like. And you said you feel something. What do you feel? And then I'll share what I feel too.
I feel a sort of a lightness, a wave, a wind, or but not made of stuff that I'm used to feeling.
I think what I feel when I feel into it and try and let go of other senses or visual perception, I think I feel like this underlying buzzing, almost like underlying buzzing, or like light quality, but undulating, sort of like spiraling, flowing in some sort of momentous direction, with momentum. That's the sort of feeling I get. Sort of like I imagine like a plant tendril sort of unrolling itself, and then like having all these little hairs or cilia kind of interacting with the vibrations of the air. That's kind of what I feel when I feel like that is reality. That is everything. Everything is sort of vibrating together in this big machine.
Say that again. You feel plant tendrils. Say that again.
No, it's just kind of like a visual of what I'm thinking of. Sort of like maybe like if you thought of like an octopus arm, right? Just without the octopus. And then it had like little fingers or little cilia sticking out from it that were interacting with the water, interacting with the the molecules around it, but always moving, always vibrating, always changing and shifting and adapting to whatever is around it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I mean, it's an interesting way to describe it, because it does defy description
Mm-hmm.
so completely. Um, to me, it's often, I think, your water. I mean, maybe you picked octopus because it's watery and it's something that flows.
Mm-hmm.
And in that state, the more you try to like hold on to it, the less it flows, and the more it finds somewhere else to go. And the more you, in my experience, the more you like open and don't grasp at it, then it can come in this arm and out that arm, can come down out your back and into the ground. Um, those are real feelings. And I've heard you talk about this on the podcast, that you you know, folks like us that grew up in the West and then have these feelings and have no structure for them, we really struggle. And so we're trying to fit it in to the Tibetan Buddhist model or whatever. Um, but again, I think it's like, if anytime you describe it, you open yourself up to to coloring it with your description in a way that you disturb the purity of the experience itself. This is an ancient idea that any description of the essence is necessarily misses it. But but it does feel. I mean, with the octopus metaphor, it does feel alive,
Mm-hmm.
and it does feel intelligent.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Let me maybe put another, of course, another inadequate label to it, but maybe to shrink it down to one word, maybe just movement, right? Like, have you ever read the book by Dan Millman, Peaceful Warrior?
no,
No, great book, but there's this father type figure in it, and his name is Socrates, but it's a modern rendition, and he's trying to teach this star athlete who had just been injured and lost his identity because he was injured. He's trying to teach this kid how to cope with his emotions better, how to be more present, how to understand more about what's going on, and to reduce his suffering. So his name is Socrates, and he had this famous saying in the book, and he says, "There's never nothing going on." Right? He's trying to teach this kid that even if you sit completely still and you think that you're not doing anything, there are still millions and billions of functions going on within your body that you could tune into. And there's millions and millions of things going on outside of you in your environment that you can tune into. So in the book, like, he makes him stand still, and then this kid Dan, he starts tuning into like the sound of bees buzzing like 100 yards away, right? When nothing in his immediate environment is going on, there's still other things going on internally as well. And so, sort of consciousness or reality, I think is just movement, right? There's never nothing going on. There's always something moving. There's always something changing. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
it's immediate, it's intimate, it's alive, it's always changing. Um, and the brain wants to nail things down as like, here's what reality is. Here's that box thing. So I've definitely been doing a better job lately of not trying to nail it down, and
so how
because
do you do
people
that?
get in.
Yeah.
Well, you just feel it. I feel it, and so it's like when I talk too much about like, oh, I run into this guy at the gym the other day, and he's a very successful computer programmer, and he takes acid, and he's convinced that we're living in a computer simulation. And it's like, sure, who knows? But for me, when I think about it like that, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right to me. And so I just try to pay attention to how does it feel when I think about it like that. Um, and um, because not only does it not feel right for me, but I then see people get into trouble on it. So I interview a lot of these underground psychedelic therapists, and these are people, as you know, who just off the books give people psychedelics and sit in a room and talk through their trip. And it is a wonderful, fascinating thing, um, and helpful, beautiful, brave. And I just hear these fantastic stories of transformation. And the one story that I heard from an underground therapist was this guy took a bunch of mushrooms, got this idea that we're living in a computer simulation, and like a video game, the only way to get out of it is to um, die. And so he tried to leave the room and go up to the top floor so he could jump out the window and get out of this simulation into whatever is reality. And this, not only is that like a bad thing, I mean, whatever, it's just life, but it was tough for this poor girl, this therapist who's five, who's not big, and not tough, and she's there by herself and can't call the cops, and so she's like, because she'll go to jail possibly, so she has to like wrestle with this dude who thinks that he's found the meaning of life, and it's this, and it has this weird component of jumping out of a building. I mean, so I think in that state, if I had had that thought, I would have just tried to feel into like, okay, what, I think it's a computer simulation. What does that feel like? I think if I jump off the building and I get into reality, what's that going to feel like? Probably not going to feel that good. So,
So when you say you're feeling into it, are you literally like taking a second to pause, taking a couple deep breaths, and what part
literally,
of
yeah.
your body are you feeling into? Are you feeling into your gut? Are you feeling into your heart? Like, what are some practical, technical aspects to your practice that you find useful?
Yeah, it's literally feeling into the body. And it's laying on my back, or that's my main way of doing it, because I find that easier than sitting on a cushion. And I try to open myself up literally, and then I try to just think about, okay, we're living in a computer simulation. What does that feel like? And I get like a tension in my forehead when I think like that, and my cheeks like tense up, and my shoulders are tight, and then there's like a rumbling in my belly, and like literally that's what just happened. Um, and then if I do the same thing and I say, I don't know what's happening, and I don't have to figure it out, and that's okay, because I can feel the beauty in life that's around me. Um, what does that feel like? It feels, some of that tension's gone away here, tension's gone away here. I can breathe better, I can breathe more deeply. That's literally what I do.
And some people, um, if they were to repeat those calm, what you repeat to yourself as being calming, I think if some people repeated that to themselves, it might bring up some anxiety, right? Because they're like, I don't know what's happening. What now? I'm going to be out of control, and then it could spiral off, right? So, feeling into that as well in a safe place and trying to understand that better can be helpful too.
Yeah, and so if you do that same exercise, and we're living in a computer simulation, makes you feel good and relaxed and okay. As long as you're not hurting anybody, great. Go with that theory.
So
Um,
here's another interesting question for you, because we know that, and I hope for you, we know that when we accumulate more information about a given topic, we can change our ideas or our belief systems about that thing, right? But this is all up here. This is all in our mind. So as we gather more information, our ideas hopefully change, and hopefully we're not staying stuck in the box with new information. Do you think it's possible when you're feeling into things? So say you talk to this guy at the gym and you're like, yeah, simulation theory does not feel right to me. It feels off balance. But then maybe you go out and you interview somebody who's working on mathematics of the simulation theory, and they explain it to you in a way that you understand it, and you get this new information. Do you think that it's possible to change how you feel about something given new data?
That's yes. Yeah, that's a good point. Um,
Because I certainly experience that with people. Like I might meet somebody and off right off the bat, my self-defense sensors go up and I'm like, oh, this person is a potential threat, or this person is a potential safety risk. um, so that's my initial feeling about them. But then the more I talk to them, the more I get to know them, the more I understand, like, oh, okay, I can trust this person. It was just this aspect of some kind of judgment I made about them that gave me this feeling. And then my feeling about them literally changes to where now I can be like, oh, okay, I can trust this person. I can let down that defensiveness. I can let down that the response to the feeling a little bit.
yeah, for sure. And like the thing about like I don't really get Buddhism um, because they say it's like an emptiness or void or whatever, and it just doesn't hit me. Um, and so but then they give me more data, and it's like, oh, there's reincarnation, and it's like, okay, what does reincarnation feel like? Yeah, that feels kind of cool. So then that makes me a little more like into Buddhism.
Mhm.
This is not great reasoning. This is not great logic. Um, it's just how I've been operating lately on these deep questions. And I don't do it on the little questions, like, what sprinkler head to buy. I don't feel into whether that one, but I, um, maybe I should. I don't know.
So fatherhood. So
Yeah.
you're a new father, and
Yeah.
how are you using this? And it's almost like a sensory organ. Like we're aware of our big five senses, or six. We have names for other senses, like our sense of time, or our sense of balance, or our sense of temperature, right? We have names for these. But as a father, I've heard, and I'm not a father myself yet, but I'm really excited to experience this. But I've heard stories of like this extrasensory feeling, that you have, this connection that you have with your kid, that you can feel their pain, or you can feel, um, yeah, like a heightened sense of connectivity.
Yeah. First of all, I want to say birth is one of the most psychedelic things I've ever been around.
Yeah, I
Um,
was in the room when my niece was born, and it was amazing.
it's crazy, right? Like that's just weird stuff happening there. Um, so that was crazy. And then I'm sure you have felt something similar to what it's like to have a kid, in that what you're talking about, how even though your parent or your wife didn't tell you that something's off, you can sense it. If you really tune in, if you slow down and you look at them and like just spend 5 minutes to stare at them. Um, with a kid, that's more important because she can't talk to me, and she's only 7 months old. She can babble and like bang things against the table and throw up. Those are her communication mechanisms. So I have to really tune in to her, and like this, what I literally do is I set a timer on my watch, and I say, okay, for 4 minutes, I'm going to stare at her. And this is going to give me a sense of where she is. And it makes our days better, because I just learn like, okay, now it's time for a nap. Now it's time for some kiwi puree. Now it's time to go check out the dogs at the park. Because when you lose track of her, it's like losing track of yourself. You dysregulate, and she gets too tired. She doesn't get enough food. You lose it's that tuning in. Yeah, that's really, really been good. Um, yeah, it's been good and interesting, and it is that like sixth sense. I can see that she's like rubbing her eyes, and that is one signal of tiredness for sure. But it took me a while to learn that, and yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, are you thinking about doing it?
Having kids?
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife and I, we want to have a whole litter of kids. After she finishes her master's degree in 2.5 years, actually, the other day she rolled over and she made me promise and high five deal her that in 2.5 years we'd start popping out babies in rapid succession. So she's like, "This is the deal. This is what we're doing. When I graduate, we're going for it." So yeah, we hope to have like, I don't know, 4, 5. Have a little jujitsu team, traveling team.
Whoo, man! I hope you stock up on your sleep now, and because it's fucking tough. So good on you, man. I hope that you love it. I'm
Yeah,
sure
my
you will.
my other buddy who has a 1-year-old just told me the other day on the podcast that that was the toughest part was losing sleep and having sleep, having inconsistency in your sleep. So like no matter when you get to sleep, waking up every 2 to 4 hours, and that was the hardest part of being an early father.
Yeah, I mean, my wife had to go to work today at 5:30, or had to get up for work today at 5:30, sort of unexpectedly, and somebody's got to get up with the kid. Even though I don't have to do anything until 8, I got to get up at 5:30, and I didn't go to bed till 1 or something, and that was tough. I'm a little dragging today. Um, you'll never experience sleep deprivation like what you have. It's like when they talk about how at Abu Ghraib they deprived these people of sleep and that was torture, and you hear that and you're like, oh, whatever, I could go without sleep. No, you can't. You'll go crazy. You will lose contact with reality. Like week 3 or whatever, my boss was just like, did you do that thing? And I'm like, what thing? And he's like, the thing I told you to do half an hour ago. And I'm like, oh, right. Or my wife, I got obsessed with shelves. All of a sudden, I felt like I had to put up a million shelves. And I'm up at 3 in the morning or whatever, like building shelves. And my wife's like, what are you doing? Go to bed. You get into this weird like state where it's like I have to do these things. And, um, it's a trip, man. It's very similar.
Mm.
You get out of it. There's times in it, like a serious trip, where you're like, I'm gonna die. I know, I know. Probably I'm not gonna die, but it feels like it right now.
Wow. Yeah, man, I can't wait. And congratulations, by the way. That's amazing. Yeah, when
Yeah, thanks,
you
man. It's
go ahead.
no, um, it's been great, and we'll see how it goes. 5, man. I can't believe you're gonna have 5. That is gonna be huge. Do you have a big house?
No,
You're gonna
man.
wing it?
No, but I know, and that's usually the response that we get from most people, especially people who have kids. They're like, "What? You want 5?" But no, Callie and I both, when we came up with the number 4 or 5, like it was a lot like you, like feeling into things. She and I had the discussion, like, okay, number one, we definitely both feel that we want kids, so that's a for sure thing. And then the next question was, okay, but how many? And we both kind of looked at each other, like trying to gauge what the other was going to say. And I think one of us just came out with it and said, like, I want a lot of kids, or I want 5 kids or something. And then the other person was like, oh, that's what I want too. And we kind of felt it. And, having one definitely didn't feel right. We're both not single kids, or single,
Only
single
child.
child. Yeah, only child. So we both know the benefits and the joys that come from having siblings. Plus, I can't imagine, um, when you have a sibling, the siblings sort of entertain each other when they're young. So it takes a load off of the parents in some ways too. Um, but yeah, we both kind of just sat with the number 5, and we're like, yeah, this feels really good. And then we started getting into a lot of uncontrollable questions and feeling into those, like, oh, how many boys do we want? How many girls do we want? Let's try and manifest this somehow with our intentions over the next couple of years as we put that out into the universe, and so yeah, it's going to be fun, and I know it's going to be extremely challenging as I watch my younger brother raise two wonderful little kids. I get to experience it vicariously through him and sort of get a bit of an education as I'm almost studying him every time I go over and asking him lots of inquisitive questions like, how are you feeling? Like, do you ever get depressed? Do you ever feel like you just want out? Like, what's going on? And really getting as much information as I can before jumping in with both feet.
Yeah, I don't have. I know that when we had my daughter, is definitely the first 2 months. We were like, I don't know if I can do this again. But in the last few months, we're like, I want to do this again.
Mm.
Um, um, yeah. I don't have, because it's so lovely. She's so lovely, and our relationship is lovely, and um, so it's, God willing, something that'll be a good addition to my life.
Mm. Yeah. What does your wife think about you being a fringe journalist hanging out with a bunch of hippie freaks? you know.
She's great. She loves it, because I have good stories to tell, usually at the dinner table. Um, I think it was helped lately with this mushroom thing that happened in Denver,
Yeah.
where
Have you been covering that at all?
I have been on that thing like white on rice for 3 years.
So I have
And
one quick question because I had Kevin Matthews on the podcast a little while ago, so my audience knows about decriminalized Denver. But and I've asked some people on the ground in Denver if they've been seeing this. But as a reporter or a journalist, I'm sure you are maybe seeing it. But have we heard any stories yet since the decriminalize happened of people wandering the streets like zombies, tripping, and any big negative events in emergency rooms or anything like that?
no,
Yeah. People were super worried that that was going to happen.
yeah, and that needs to be reported out better. Um, just because I haven't heard about it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. So that's actually a good prompt from you, that I should actually make some phone calls. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
because
I
that's what all we heard leading up to it in the media on the opposing side, and luckily there was not that much opposition to it. I mean, the vote was there was opposition, but in the media, I mean, you'd only hear like the worst bad trip stories, which happen extremely rarely.
so this is the most interesting thing to me right now, is what's going to be the framework of this new decriminalization. And it's happening very rapidly and very, um, it's following in the footsteps of pot in a lot of ways, where from 1996, when they legalized medical in California, they had to figure out, what does that look like? We've never had pot out in the open, not since the early 70s. And so there's these great discussions going on among the Denver mushroom folks, of how do we provide the resources so that folks don't get fucked up, and if they do get fucked up and fry their brain, how do we bring them back into the fold of this reality? And so there's this is where people like the NOAC are great. Um, there's talk of starting a uh, cooperative that would be, support people in their journeys, not to sell or buy the mushroom, but to sell or buy therapy, sell or buy integration services, containers, testing stuff, to make sure your stuff is consistent. And just to have a place to go. Like if you're fucking spun, here's the 1-800 number of the website, and and whether that's like a chat online that you pay $2 an hour to do or something, um, or it's a real person that you go and see to get unspun. Um, I think this is really important because, like in Amsterdam, it's very under the there's tons of sales, but there's no above ground container that I'm aware of. There's a couple of retreats that I've written about, where you pay thousands and thousands of dollars to go sit in a room and have a psychedelic experience. But if you take mushrooms in Amsterdam, and I have, you're just wandering the streets, and it went great, and I loved it. Um,
But you weren't setting fires. You weren't causing any trouble.
no, I wasn't. But if I did, it would be great to have a 1-800 number
Mhm.
to be like, spun on mushrooms, call 1-800, I'm spun. And have somebody tell you, okay, well, find a safe place, lay down, take a Risperdone, and don't call your parents and tell them that you're the Lizard King. So that's what these mushroom folks are trying to build, and I think that is as um, because and then we can have a response like, okay, somebody did show up to the emergency room, spun and talking crazy and naked and whatever, and oh, mushrooms are legal, I can do this, and it's like, well, no, you can't be crazy in public, that's not allowed. um, so so it's not the mushrooms fault, it's the fault of this person that they didn't, fault is the wrong word, but it's that this person didn't take advantage of resources that are there to get unspun or to learn how to not get spun in the first place. Um,
Right, to
so
educate themselves first. And that's where the NOAC Society, I think, is crucial, here in Colorado at least, is that they're primarily an education organization. So they're out there to educate people on things like set and setting, therapeutic uses, how to screen psychedelic therapists or psychedelic integration therapists. There's a lot of uh, sexual abuse going on in a lot of the like the ayahuasca retreats down in Peru and places like that, and uh, it's a whole new emerging landscape, and it's a revolution, a new psychedelic renaissance, and there needs to be good information and there needs to be lots of information out there available to the public so that you're right, they're not just taking mushrooms for the first time and go wandering around Capitol Hill in Denver. No, that's probably not a good idea. But educate yourself on set and setting, get some supporters, and get a plan before you do that. Maybe, yeah, it'd be nice if there was that number and then there's like an app for it so that when you can't see straight and you can't dial the number, you can just have a one button connection to somebody on the other line, because I know sometimes you can't see you can't make out the
oh,
hand.
the phone is a bizarre instrument. Like, what is this demon device, and why is it flashing at me?
Mhm.
um, yeah, maybe like we have 911 for medical emergencies, we have 311 for general information on the city of Denver, maybe 411 is to find a phone number, maybe like 711 is I'm fucked up on mushrooms, and then we send a nice van around, with some carpets and a little disco ball and some nice soft blankets and a really loving, 65-year-old hippie that will just tell you that everything is okay,
And
and
give you a
she's there.
massage.
She'll hug you. She'll tell you this is a drug and it's gonna pass, and um,
The
don't
decompress
worry
fest.
about it, honey. Yeah. How much would that cost? I don't think it would cost that much.
Mm-mm.
I mean, when on the ambulance ride costs like $1,400 or something like that. We could pay that old hippie lady she could do that for a week for $1,400.
Well, and those ambulances themselves cost like over $100,000, right, to outfit the
Yeah.
whole thing. Like if you just buy like a old short bus and outfit the inside, like that, maybe 20 grand, and
Yeah.
you got this mobile support bus.
Yeah. So you're talking about Zendo at festivals? Like,
Yeah,
what about
great.
just Zendo has a bus?
Mhm.
This may be pie in the sky thinking, and nobody wants to do it, and maybe there's no money for it. Um, but wouldn't it be great if there was? I mean, I literally think that um, there's enough enthusiasm and just energy and goodwill among the folks that are in this space that there's more possible now than there has been in decades, and that maybe there is. um, I mean, the Zendo is a very hopeful thing. The
Yeah, look,
energy in those,
see the shirt
yeah,
I'm wearing?
it's yeah, nice work.
Yeah, the map shirt today. So Zendo is run by Sarah Gale out of Boulder, Colorado, and it's a psychedelic harm reduction organization under the umbrella of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, and they do a lot of stuff for big festivals like Burning Man and other huge festivals. But yeah, they're right in our own backyard, and I think they're going to be instrumental in, again, helping to educate the communities, helping to educate supporters, helping to educate emergency personnel on how to deal with and de-escalate in a therapeutic way some of these people who might have limited experience with these medicines. So as a reporter, you really have your finger on the pulse down there after the decriminalize happened. So what's some new movements in this area that's really interesting to you?
I want to say real quick, I love Sarah Gale. I think she's so cool and just a great person. I wrote about her not too long ago, and Zendo and Burning Man, and I talked to one of the folks that she helped, and this kid told me a great story, which was that he was at Burning Man, and he went out onto the playa, like way out far, and he was on 80 different drugs, huge doses. And he said, I saw a flash of light, and the aliens came and took me. And I do what I always do as a reporter, is like, wow, what was that like? Um, and he said, oh, I blacked out, and and then I woke up in the middle of the activity, and I was totally spun, and I went stumbling around, and I didn't know where I was, and cops were gonna come get me or whatever. And then there comes Sarah Gale out of the dust and the gloam of the playa, and she redirected me and corralled me into the Zendo tent and put the nice blanket on me and did her wonderful, lovely um, sitting. And the kid says, "I don't know. I might have never been the same if it hadn't been for that. And who knows if the aliens would have taken me up again if it hadn't been for that." And I was like, "Yeah." Well, and now I said, "Isn't it nice now that you know that it wasn't the aliens and it was just the drugs?" And he was like, "Bro, I don't know that." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right." But good thing Sarah Gale was there. Um, so the mushroom, I think it's this. I wrote about this in last month's Rooster Magazine about these opportunities that folks are seeing in this space of the heavy hand of the law coming off slightly, and people seeing opportunities to create cool stuff. Like I talked to, about cluster headaches, these super painful migraines that, not supposedly, I'm pretty convinced that psychedelics really help them. But there's like all these people that have them that are pretty straight people, and they're not going to go down to their local college and source LSD from the local base head. So, but what cluster busters could do theoretically is have a monthly trip in where they rent a house and have nice beds and have people come in from all around, and apparently and it wouldn't be 100% legal, but it seems unlikely to me that the cops would go in and bust a bunch of people having headaches, and they say it's their only cure for headaches. So that would just be really interesting, and that's a space that could open up here in Denver. Another space that could open up could be this end of life anxiety piece. That there
The
is
right to try. Yeah.
yes, and NOAC is great on this too.
Mm-hmm.
So you could set up a space with a therapist. You're dying of cancer, and I've interviewed a guy who has these terrible tumors, and he says that mushrooms are the thing that help him in his fight with cancer.
And do you mean like
And
he uses it as a way to actually fight the cancer, or as a way to like come to terms with his own mortality and that he's dealing with a terminal illness?
yeah, those things, and the pain. He says it helps the
Ah.
pain, which I think is fascinating. And again, another super underexplored facet of psychedelics. But so this guy could do this theoretically. Again, not legally, but the local cops would probably, hopefully, leave him alone. And the key to all of this is you have to use your own mushrooms. Buying and selling mushrooms is not allowed. So as long as this guy, if you grow your own mushrooms, theoretically the cops should leave you alone. Again, none of this is legal. It's just about whether or not the cops are going to come after you. So this guy, I went and saw his grow in his basement, and he's converted his basement bathroom into this grow room, and he's got these big tubs of mushrooms, and he showed me jar after jar after jar of them, and he's super amped on it, and so isn't that interesting? So he could do. Cops should, I think, if they're going to follow 301, leave him alone. They should leave these cluster buster people alone. I think, how do you learn how to grow the mushrooms? That's then where there's talk of starting a cooperative among these people who pushed the initiative, where people could learn how to grow and grow safely and grow, and then sort of be into a system and like be connected with people that have some history, and you find the old acid head, and you find the old stoners that know how to use this stuff, and connect those people.
Yeah, and just for the listeners out there, all the underground psychedelic therapists that I know don't actually provide the substance for the client unless it's at like a ketamine clinic or an MDMA phase 3 testing site or something where the researcher has DEA approval to provide the substance. So most psychedelic therapists and most psychedelic integration therapists, which I'm listed on the MAPS Psychedelic Integration Therapist site for Northern Colorado. So for anybody out there who needs help coming back down to earth and making sense of their experience, reach out to me on mindops.com. But yeah, so go ahead.
So I want to say that there are continuing meetings going on of the mushroom folks, and like the next big one, actually I'm not sure if these are open to the public or not, but check the Decriminalized Denver stuff online. Well, I know for a fact that like I am talking about mushrooms to the psychedelia series. There's the Denver Psychedelic Club is partnering with Alamo Drafthouse and Gaia Television to run the series of these TV shows called Psychedelica, and I'm talking about mushrooms at one of them. And that would be a good place for people to come if they're interested in sort of hooking into the 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 vibe. What do you call it? Community?
Yeah, and that's a great show too. I was on the cannabis episode.
Oh,
Ben,
nice.
yeah, Ben is a great guy. The guy that produces it. So they're going for a second season.
I no, I'm not going to be on the show.
No.
They're going to show the show at the Alamo Draft House. I'm talking on August 26th. They're doing a show, the mushroom episode. I'm going to show it at Alamo Draft House, and then I am talking afterwards along with a couple other people, just what I know about mushrooms. And also before the event, I think is going to be a psychedelic club meeting. So that these are the kinds of things where people, if they're interested in learning how to use these medicines safely and productively, um, can hook into. I mean, Psychedelic Club meets every week. NOAC is once a month. I think NOAC is aimed more at people who are professionals, but Psychedelic Club's for anybody. These mushroom, there's going to be, I think, more mushroom meetings that people can come to.
Yeah, we have a CSU psychedelic club up here as well. That's part of the larger psychedelic clubs nationwide, which Denver Psychedelic Club is also a part of. But yeah, like I was saying just a second ago, if people are looking for psychedelic assisted therapy, there are people out there, if you search hard enough, who are willing to come to your space or create a space for you to get the most therapeutic benefit from your trip that you're already planning on doing anyway. So again, they won't necessarily provide substances because that's illegal, but they will help you make the most out of it, which is a great service. So reach out to those people for support if you want it. Yeah, you just gave a presentation at the Denver Psychedelic Club, right? What was that
Yeah,
all
I did.
about?
Oh, that was just me and my friend Lindsay talking about this book called Lost Connections by this guy called Johan Hari. And it's one component of it is how mushrooms can help depression and anxiety. The larger book was about why are we depressed and anxious. And his theory is that we have lost connections with our family, with our communities, with meaningful work, meaningful values, nature. Um, and so we used to live in this world in which we existed in a web of a tribe. And you know all these arguments.
Yeah, it sounds
Um,
like the Park argument for addiction.
yes, yes, yes. And he talks about Rat Park quite a bit. Um, yeah, I mean, that's why we're fucked up. That's why we're sad. So it was just me and Lindsay talking about Psychedelic Club does a book club once a month, and so I've done book clubs. I've given presentation on books a couple times, um, and so it was just talking about this one. Um, the last presentation I gave to the Psychedelic Club was about a book about this guy that got busted, like the largest acid bust in history. This dude got caught with the potential to make like 7 million hits.
Mm.
And he was like living in a underground missile silo in the middle of Kansas, decommissioned missile silo that his buddy bought, and they were making a bunch of shit. Like, and so he wrote this fascinating, crazy, big book about that episode, and also about like the deeper meaning of psychedelics. And um, he wrote about it was like it wasn't just him that was making it alone in this missile silo, but there's like a network of underground LSD manufacturers, and they work together, and they have like spies, like people that tell them if law enforcement's after them, and they have like um, deep pockets of people in industry and commerce that fund them. It's just this fascinating book, and who knows how much of it is true, but wow, what a cool story.
That's amazing. You also hear about the defelonizing bill that Jared Polis passed, right? So this is something I think you might have a. I mean, every time I bring this up to anybody who's even heard of the bill, they've never considered this. But the bill was passed so that it defelonizes the possession of any substance under 4 grams. That includes heroin, meth, cocaine, mushrooms. But my question is, does that also include 4 grams of LSD? Because 4 grams of LSD is an insane amount of that substance, knowing that, you know, it only takes the most minuscule amount to have a psychoactive effect. So I don't know if
Or
this was,
4 grams of carfentanil.
yeah, right. 4 grams of anything like, I'm wondering if some of these aspects were considered, what would happen if something like that, you know, came up.
Well, my understanding of that bill, and I could be wrong, is that there's 2 definitions. One is a single use amount.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. So single use for somebody, right? So have you ever heard of Kalindi Iyi? Yeah,
Yeah.
this guy, I met him. He lives out in Detroit area, but he regularly takes upwards of 40 grams of dried mushrooms at a time, and for him, that's a single dose. But if almost anybody else, you know, was pulled over by the police and they found 40 grams and they tried to argue single dose for that, I don't think they'd get away with it. I think, you know, that's interesting.
What do you think that's like, man? Wow.
He says he does it old Terrence McKenna style. So he says he goes into a dark room and takes all that in total silence, no music, no nothing, no candles, just complete darkness. And he says he goes to other planets. He travels time. He says he talks to entities and beings, ancestor. He does a lot of ancestry work, things like that. So
Do
pretty
you think he's on
incredible.
the do you think he's on the level?
I do. I met him in Detroit. That was the first time I ever met him. I met him at the Detroit Psychedelic Conference and spoke with him. And he's also a martial artist. So, you know, that's when he brings that up, you know, I had to inquire to make sure he was legit. And he was legit about his martial arts talks. So I can only assume that he's also legit about other aspects of his life. And other people I've interviewed and talked to also say that he's on the level and that they've witnessed him do these feats. And yeah, I mean, he's one of those people really pushing the boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, because I hear sometimes from people that are like, I took a gram of, and they'll just start listing these things. And it's like, I took a gram of LSD plus 20 grams of mushrooms plus 40 milligrams of 4-ACO plus. And it's like, did you? Did you really? And maybe they did. I mean, it's not impossible. Could you
But
even
yeah.
get 40 grams of mushrooms into your body? Isn't that like this much mushrooms? Like, isn't that a
Yeah.
lot?
Yeah, but what comes to my mind when people start almost bragging about their use like that, like you feel into it again, right? So you feel into what they're saying, and to me, it almost immediately feels like, oh, this is somebody's ego trying to tell me or prove to me something, you know, and I just take it as that. And when it feels like it's ego, then I usually don't believe what the story is, you know. I feel into it, whether it's truth
Yeah,
or
I
not.
mean, and part of that's just, I mean, that's also natural. I mean, when I first started doing ayahuasca, I tried to take the biggest doses that I possibly could, just because I love to see the big light shows. Um, and I loved coming back with the stories to tell my friends of, holy shit, dude, I flew up to the sun and stopped the motion of light with my mind and then swam in and out of the photons coming off of the corona and pushed them around like billiard balls into each other. And it's like, that's a fucking cool story. um yeah, it's that macho thing of like, oh,
Right, but are you telling the story so that your friends will like you more, or are you telling the story so that your friends can share in that experience or share in that information that you brought back? So, I mean, you got to check in with yourself on those.
yeah, I mean, it was just me finding crazy shit when I
Yeah,
was,
right.
it's just like,
Yeah,
have you seen
totally.
this crazy shit? I mean, that's like exploring, you know. Um, so, I mean, it's just like people skiing, you know, it's like, oh, dude, I jumped off a 40-foot cliff, and it's like, holy fuck.
Mhm.
And then later you're like, was it really 40 feet?
Mhm.
And are you sure? Did you measure it? Did you get a tape measure? You 100% that's what it was. So I don't know.
So any parting advice you might have for the audience, just from your perspective, for what you're going through in your life, what you've been through, just a little
No, I have nothing.
parting gift. Okay.
I have nothing. I know nothing.
That's good enough. Like I said, that's
Do
a
you have
great
some?
admission. Parting gift of advice. Um, well, I think what we were talking about earlier is really resonating still with me, that it's not about coming to a conclusion. It's not about coming to an outcome, but it's more about continuing to seek and continuing to explore whatever it is that you're going to explore, and just opening up to whatever comes. I think that's a big thing for a lot of people out there to hear. You know, that it's okay to give yourself permission to pursue with vigor what you're passionate about, and to really feel that.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And I would, you know, when I first started writing about drugs, everyone was like, "That's nothing. It's less than nothing. It's going to hurt your chances of being a legitimate writer about other things." And that may end up being true, but it's been the most interesting job that I've had. You know, I've written about sports and entertainment and politics, but writing about drugs has just been so interesting. And I got that job because even when everybody said that's nothing or less than nothing, I said, I still think it's interesting. And I'm still going to look at it. Um, and sometimes that works out. And it's nice when it does.
Well, Reilly, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. If people want to reach out to you, or if they have like a story to share or something like that, how can people reach you?
Yeah, I would love that. Reach me. My email is Reilly at therooster.com. Reilly spelled Reilly at therooster.com. I'm on Twitter at Reilly Capps, ReillyCapps. Those are the best ways. And then go to therooster.com, which is a highly cool website that I write for, and pick up the Rooster Magazine, which comes out in Boulder, Denver, and Fort Collins. And there's contact information in there. It's a really cool magazine. Like, I hope people check it out.
Perfect. And I'll include all those forms of contact in the description of this episode. So, for all you listeners out there, if you want to get in contact with Reilly, get in contact with him through those links that I'll leave in the description, or through my website, mindops.com. There's a comment section, and you can always relay information through me to Reilly. Or something like that. Again, Reilly, thanks for coming on. It's always a pleasure to see you, and I look forward to seeing you at some more events in the near future.
Yeah, me too, man. Send me the information on when your jujitsu cannabis thing is, and then I totally want to come to that.
I absolutely will, man. All right,
All
we'll
right.
talk
Thanks,
soon.
man. All right, take care.
Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.